Welcome to the Fantasy Throwdown Podcast, bringing you the latest in sports news, fantasy analysis, and opinions. Don't forget the hot takes. Can't have a sports show without hot takes these days. What about hot cakes, though? I want some hot cakes. Now, here's your host, ready to jump into the thick of things, Dwayne Callender.
What a slate of games for NFL Wildcard weekend. Let's get right down to it because we had some surprises go down. Let's start off with the key story of today. So obviously the Sunday games just wrapped up. The Minnesota Vikings pull off the upset on the Saints in overtime, again with pass interference being the call that wasn't called. Oh man, I laugh, but I shouldn't, because essentially we just had the NFL basically give the FU to a team on national television, and we're just all kind of numb to it. But the Minnesota Vikings have beat the New Orleans Saints today, and yes, there was offensive pass interference on Kyle Rudolph that the NFL refused to actually call. I don't know what else you could say about that other than, I mean, what else can you say? It is absurd, but that is actually, in fact, what happened. But the story of this game was the fact that Drew Brees was, for all intents and purposes, a below average NFL QB in this game. He couldn't release the ball when he wanted to. He had difficulty, even though the stat line doesn't look awful. He was 26 and 33, but total yardage was 208. Like, literally, it was a bunch of dump off passes and then yards after catch by his receivers. The problem is, the Vikings did slow down Michael Thomas. Michael Thomas was only 7 catches for 70 yards. And for most of the game, he only had 8 targets. Drew Brees just had difficulty getting Michael Thomas the football. He was not able to target Michael Thomas nearly as much as he should have. But he was getting pressure up the middle. Linval Joseph did his job up the middle for the Vikings. But Drew Brees, again, and this is what I've been talking about, when it comes into situations where he just has these flat games, the reaction time is so much slower than it needs to be, that it just causes issues. There was a key fumble in the fourth quarter that the Saints almost didn't even get this game to OT from. Drew Brees was so bad. I mean, the Saints had to rally from 10 points down the fourth quarter just to get it to overtime. It was 20-10. Kirk Cousins makes a beautiful throw in overtime, but Kirk Cousins also disappeared for vast stretches of the second half too. As much as people are going to be singing the praises of Kirk Cousins, I mean, the truth of the matter is that this victory goes to the Vikings defense, because they consistently bottled up the Saints to the extent that the Saints had to turn to Taysom Hill to be their running and passing attack. Taysom Hill completed a 50-yard pass and ran for 50 yards and was by far the leading rusher for the Saints, because Alvin Kamara might as well have been invisible. Despite the fact that he had 8 catches, he only got 34 yards receiving, and he ran for 21 yards on 7 carries. Alvin Kamara was essentially Drew Brees' dump-off pass, and Kamara couldn't get anything going today. I know Kamara has to be either hurt or just utterly frustrated, because he was a complete and utter non-factor today. And I had my concerns about Kamara to begin with, so I can't say that I'm surprised. The problem is that maybe the Saints should have signed Antonio Brown, because the issue that I had with this team was if Michael Thomas got shut down, which I didn't see happening with the Vikings and their banged up secondary. My concern was, where's this offense coming from? Because I don't think Drew Brees can elevate these guys anymore. And that's exactly what happened. The Saints offense completely stalled, and Sean Payton had to get so desperate to bring in Taysom Hill to reinvigorate the offense. There were points in that game today. I honestly thought Teddy Bridgewater should have been warmed up and ready to go. Now, Sean Payton can't do that to Drew Brees, and he would get crushed if the Saints lost anyway, and Drew Brees was benched in favor of Teddy Bridgewater. But the Saints needed something, and he turned to Taysom Hill to run some gadget plays, and to his credit, Taysom Hill panned out. But that's the problem. It took so long for the Saints to acknowledge that this was not going to work the way they were going, and to do it in the fourth quarter, it was a little too late, because Dalvin Cook at that point had established a running attack for the Vikings, and they played ball control offense the remainder of the game. Now, when it came to overtime, then they at least turned the reins loose again on Cousins, and he completed a beautiful rainbow throw to Adam Thielen that, folks are going to complain and say, oh, the DB should do a better job of that. No, nonsense. When you high point a ball that high and you're in the Superdome staring up in the lights, that is the hardest ball. And you'll see it on SportsCenter and all the highlight shows afterwards. It is the hardest ball for a defensive back to pay attention to, because, again, you're running full sprint, looking over your shoulder, try to high point a ball in the lights when the receiver knows where the ball is. To me, there's only a handful of guys that I would even trust to be able to make a play on a ball of that type. And more often than not, the receiver's still going to win that matchup 9 out of 10. The reason why it doesn't happen all that often is that you actually, as a QB, it's one of the more difficult throws you have to make, because, again, you have to put perfect touch on it, and not a lot of QBs actually have that capabilities to do so. There's only a handful of guys that in the league that actually can make that throw, and Drew Brees can't make that throw anymore. There are a couple other guys in the league that people consider to be elite QBs that I know can't make that throw. So you got to give Kirk Cousins credit where it's due. But the final play of the game, Kyle Rudolph catches a fade route in the end zone and clearly shoves off. Listen, the NFL has had it in for the Saints for quite some time now. The Saints fans are convinced that it has to do with Bountygate. If the Saints caused the video replay review rule to come into effect, and the fact that the NFL refused to even review the play speaks volumes. I mean, I'm sure Al Riveron is going to say some nonsense that they reviewed it in real time and didn't think it rose to the level of pass interference, which is like, I don't know what kind of spin you could actually say, but if you actually did a clip reel of all the offensive pass interference calls that were called, and then that play would be front and center as to what is actually supposed to be called pass interference. The NFL can say whatever they want. They do have an issue with the Saints. They've stuck it to them, and they're hoping that the national media doesn't pay that close attention to it. Honestly, it's one of those where, yeah, the Saints have a gripe, but they didn't lose the game because of that call. They put themselves in a position to lose that game due to that call because they couldn't get their act together, and Drew Brees was absolutely all kinds of awful today. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. All right, moving on. Let's talk. I mean, I could talk about the Seahawks-Eagles game, but I mean, let's be honest. This game was over the moment Jadeveon Clowney landed on Carson Wentz's head. Because if you thought for a second that Josh McCown was going to lead the Eagles to a win over win over the Seahawks, I got a bridge to sell you. I thought that Wentz was going to return to this game, but once they pulled him back into the locker room and the news started circulating that they pulled Wentz's wife to bring her to the locker room area, you knew he was done for the day with a concussion. And for anyone that would suggest that Carson Wentz was trying to tap out of the game, you're an idiot. There's no way he's going to play through that second half of the season to get the Eagles into the playoffs, because the Eagles were basically done. Let's remember, the Eagles were done, and they ran the table to get into the playoffs. As bad as the NFC East was, give them credit where credit's due. He's not going to tap out unless he suffered a concussion, and the medical doctors, because remember, with the new concussion protocols, there are independent medical evaluators looking at these players. They determined that he suffered a severe concussion. There's no way they can allow him back into the game. That's the long and short of it. I mean, the NFL put in these measures in place for player safety, and this is the world we got to live in. Would Carson Wentz probably have put himself back in the game? Absolutely. But there's no way he was going to get medically cleared. And once that happened, the Eagles were done. Because with as many injuries as they had, losing your starting quarterback to boot, I don't care how lackluster Seattle played in this game. They were going to win that game no matter what, and Seattle knew it. I mean, it's really that simple. So you're going to get a matchup with Seattle and Green Bay, and if DK Metcalf puts on the performance today that against the Packers next week, the Seahawks are going to win. DK Metcalf had 7 catches for 160 yards. He was a vertical threat all game long. The Packers defense is susceptible to the deep ball. So I know Russell Wilson can flick it out there with the best of them. I am convinced that the Seattle rushing attack will not do anything unless it's Russell Wilson scrambling. They could say they're going to give more carries to Marshawn Lynch moving forward. I mean, between Travis Homer and Marshawn Lynch, they combined for 17 carries and 19 yards. Yeah, I'll say that again. Between Marshawn Lynch and Travis Homer, they combined for 17 carries and 19 yards. That's right, 17 carries and 19 yards. But hey, Beast Mode had a touchdown. That was a 1-yard run. I mean, I don't know what else you want me to say. It is what it is. This was an ugly fantasy slate of games for Sunday, and it wasn't all that pretty Saturday. I'm also seeing stories on Twitter that there's allegations of collusion for the person who just won the Millionaire Maker on DraftKings. This should be fun. But anyway, before I get further distracted, yeah, the Seahawks did what they needed to do. They won 17-9. It was not a pretty game. You're not going to be watching this on NFL films 10 years from now. This was an ugly game. Let's move on. So going back to the Saturday games, you had the Texans and the Bills, and oh man, Bill O'Brien. Bill. If it wasn't for Deshaun Watson, Bill O'Brien would have been fired years ago. Deshaun Watson continues to save Bill O'Brien's job, and I should say that I'm lucky that Deshaun Watson keeps saving Bill O'Brien's job, because I am utterly convinced that the way the Giants head coaching search is going right now, that Bill O'Brien would be the front runner to become the next head coach of the Giants if he got fired if they had lost this game and he got fired. Point blank, the Bills should have won this game handily. Why Josh Allen is throwing so many friggin' passes is like an utter mystery to me. I cannot, for the life of me, figure out why Josh Allen is throwing so many passes. It didn't make any sense. I mean, truth be told, it screwed everything up because now you've got a situation where Josh Allen is going to be remembered for all the screw ups he had. And I mean, this has created more questions about the Bills quarterback situation moving forward. Like, they can say whatever they want. Now I have legitimate doubts that Josh Allen is going to be a franchise QB based off of how this playoff game went. So to recap, the Bills were up 16-0 at in the third quarter. We're in complete control of this game. Deshaun Watson leads a tremendous comeback with minimal run gain. Deshaun Watson was the leading rusher for his team. He had 14 carries for 55 yards. Carlos Hyde had 48 yards on 16 carries. So yeah, that is a 3 yards per carry average. And Duke Johnson had one gadget play that accounted for his 38 yards rushing. But this was Deshaun Watson carrying his team. He was able to finally get something going with DeAndre Hopkins. I mean, Deshaun Watson was completing passes through multiple receivers, just trying to get something going. But my biggest gripe with the Bills is the fact that Devin Singletary did not get any touches in the second half that he needed to in clutch moments. They were giving carries to Frank Gore. I mean, I love Frank Gore, but Frank Gore is not your number one running back. There's a reason why Devin Singletary took over the primary running back duties at the close of the year. Why is Frank Gore stealing carries from Devin Singletary? And in critical situations when you're in the red zone. The Bills lost this game in large part due to Josh Allen and critical mismanagement by Sean McDermott. When they're throwing when they should be running in the red zone, when they're running it, they're giving it to Frank Gore instead of Devin Singletary. The Bills had chance after chance to put this game away against the Texans and ended up having to settle for 3 points. It was infuriating watching this game. The Texans had no business winning this game. They were thoroughly outplayed. They sacked Deshaun Watson 7 times, people. I can't be any clearer than that. Deshaun Watson was running for his life and still got sacked 7 times. Part of the reason why he was scrambling so much is because he had to. The Bills were on his tail the entire game. But Josh Allen and his decision-making, oh boy. I mean, where do we start? Taking multiple sacks to put yourself out of field goal range when all you need is a field goal. I mean, Josh Allen, the Bills had to scramble to tie this game up to get into overtime. Josh Allen took multiple sacks, knocked them out of field goal range, and they still had the defense still had to bail them out again to get the ball back to even send this into overtime. But Josh Allen, even in overtime, tries lateraling the football because he lost track of the clock. No one understands the decision-making that Josh Allen underwent in this game. And again, one of my descriptions for Josh Allen was he's a couple of bad decisions away from being Blake Bortles with inexplicable turnovers that you cannot explain. And I have no idea how you can feel good about Josh Allen and his performance when his meltdowns are just, there's a reason why his nickname is Wyoming Josh, because he tries to make these cowboy plays and just makes inexplicable turnovers, whether it's just a terrible pick, a fumble, taking a bad sack when he doesn't need to. Like, there were just so many poor choices that everyone on Twitter, you can see, is having the same reaction of, what the hell is this guy doing? It is one of the most inexplicable things you'll see. And again, as I said, I have deep reservations about Josh Allen as a franchise QB. The Bills, and this is the problem when you invest in, and I say this to Giants fans all the time, when you have big question marks about your QB, and you already kind of get yourself to the stage of, yeah, we're just going to have to try to make it work, it's almost always a recipe for failure. I'm just saying it. Maybe he learns a big lesson from this, but I just don't know. I just don't know, because even Brett Favre, as much as people talk about Brett Favre's decision making never improved throughout his entire career. His throwing ability is what salvaged him. Josh Allen is not Brett Favre. So I don't know. I really don't know how that could even happen. But the play of the game, and everyone's going to be talking about this for years to come. You've got you've got the 3rd and 18. Well, there are two plays, I should say. Everyone's going to talk about Deshaun Watson breaking two he was sacked by two separate guys and still found a way to break out of it, spin out of the tackles of both players, and find Tywan Jones wide open. But even earlier in the drive, it was 3rd down and 18, and Watson was able to find Duke Johnson in space because the Bills linebackers in coverage dropped back too deep in coverage and gave enough space for Duke Johnson to wiggle his way to find the 1st down. That play killed the Bills. Outside of Deshaun Watson spinning out of two tacklers to make it the big pass play to set up the winning score. Again, that 3rd down and 18 in overtime. Oh, that is that's one that's going to haunt the Bills coaching staff for quite some time, amongst all the other decisions that they made. As I said, the Bills had no excuse of losing this game, but they did. And the curse continues, according to Bills fans, because they still have not won a playoff game. Since 95. They have not won a playoff game since 1995. The streak continues. All right, moving on. And I'll be the one to admit it. I did not think that the Titans, with a one-trick pony and just running, Derrick Henry is a man-child. Just an absolute monster. A man amongst boys. Listen, I did not see Derrick Henry being able to just smash and smash and smash and smash and smash the Patriots the way he did. I said he needed $150 to have a chance of beating the Patriots. He ran for 182 yards on 34 carries. That's the game, folks. The New England offense could not get anything going. I thought that the Pats would be able to turn it into a James White game, throw a bunch of passes underneath to Edelman and White. But the truth of the matter is that the Titans defense was ready to tackle. They made a bunch of tackles and just kept making sure that New England ended up being short on a number of plays. And the problem is that even when Tom Brady had time, he couldn't find anyone open. Tom Brady was clearly frustrated that entire game, and the Titans just wore him down. I mean, it was a 20-13 game, but man, that game felt like it was a 2-touchdown deficit for the Pats because it just continually felt as though they were going through an uphill climb. And even at halftime, when it's 14-13 Titans, my dad and I are talking through this game, and I'm saying that the Pats are going to lose this game. At halftime, in a game of a 1-point game in Foxborough, I thought the Pats were going to lose this unless they had some lucky break or turnover to turn the tide. And it never came because it just looked as though Derrick Henry was going to have his way and there was nothing the Pats were going to be able to do about it. And that's literally what happened. It was a slow, methodical death for the Patriots. And all of America was... It seemed like everyone on Twitter was celebrating the fact that the Pats were losing and eventually lost. The one moment that I think signifies this game more than anything else was with about 6 minutes ago, Mike Vrabel, the coach of the Titans, employed a time-wasting strategy that Bill Belichick has used many times in the past where it's a running clock until it hits the 5-minute mark of the game. And he was initially deliberately having delay of game penalties on his team just so he could run the clock down to under 5 minutes. Because it's a running clock, it will, even with a penalty, it will keep going. Bill Belichick, knowing the rule and that he can't do anything to stop it, is turning to the referee asking, how is that legal? When he knows that he's one of the people who taught it to Mike Vrabel. Because Mike Vrabel saw Belichick use that so many times against other teams when he played for him with the Patriots. So to me, that was one of my favorite moments because it was one of the sides where Belichick knew he was in trouble and had no other recourse but to complain to the referee because he had no other way of getting out of it. So, this was just a very interesting game to say the least. I will say that, it's almost a certainty in my opinion that Brady's done in New England. I think that unless Belichick loses the power battle to Brady once again, I think Belichick's going to get his way and not bring back Tom Brady. It depends on what Robert Kraft wants to do. I know Kraft wants Brady to come back. I'm not sure Brady wants to come back, and I'm very sure that Belichick doesn't want Brady back. So when you've got 2 out of the 3 guys not wanting to make it work out, and only one guy there to try to play peacemaker to make both sides agree, I just think that this is an awkward situation. And I think this is probably the end of Tom Brady in New England. I don't think Brady's retiring. He probably should retire because I don't think the grass is greener. Those stops where Tom Brady could go post-Pats, I mean, the Chargers, maybe the Colts. I just don't see a ton of landing spots that are going to give him much better opportunity to win a Super Bowl than what he currently has in New England. That's the problem. Given his skill set at this point and what he needs, the Pats need a playmaker. They absolutely needed Antonio Brown. I mean, they can say whatever they want. They absolutely needed Antonio Brown. And, I wasn't checking Twitter for Antonio Brown sightings last night, but there's no question that the Patriots needed Antonio Brown in that game to open up the top of the defense. So that's all that there was for NFL Wildcard Weekend. I took an absolute bloodbath in terms of some of the picks because I was heavy on Michael Thomas in DraftKings, and that was an unmitigated disaster. While I did play Josh Allen, And again, this is not what I think of Josh Allen as a QB. It's more along the lines of Josh Allen was cheap and he runs around, so you get a nice floor of points from the quarterback position. This was just an ugly week. Unless you stacked your lineups with Derrick Henry and Dalvin Cook, you weren't going very far. Now, I'm seeing something on Twitter that the winner of the DraftKings Millie Maker was a former contestant on The Bachelor, but now I'm seeing that there's stories of collusion because she maxed out the full 150 entries in the Millie Maker tournament, which, is a pretty penny because you're essentially talking about a $25 entry, and by my math, that puts you literally at $4,000 in entries. Yeah, $37.50 in entries. But that should be interesting. If they could actually prove that she colluded and that she and her husband maxed out the entries to get 300 entries with unique lineups as opposed to the usual cap of 150. Yeah, that's going to cause some issues, but that's all I got for now. Interesting NFL Wildcard weekend. You got some interesting games set up because you got Minnesota playing San Francisco. You got Tennessee traveling to Baltimore. Derrick Henry should actually have a good day running against the Ravens defense. And the Ravens are going to run the football. So that should be a very quick game for Saturday night. That's going to be a lot of running clock situations. I can already foresee that happening. You got the Texans traveling to Kansas City. Will Andy Reid shoot himself in the foot yet again in the postseason? Because we know Bill O'Brien will, but it will be Patrick Mahomes and Deshaun Watson, and I will be excited to see that matchup. And the nightcap will be Seattle traveling to Lambeau Field to play the Packers. And again, I'm not a fan of the Packers this year, but this is the Packers' best chance of getting Aaron Rodgers to a Super Bowl because the way some of these NFC teams have panned out, if Seattle can upset San Francisco, I think Green Bay has the advantage over Seattle. Now, I'm saying Seattle. If Minnesota can upset San Francisco, I think Green Bay has a great shot against the Vikings because they just have a mind lock on the some type of mental block on the Vikings where the Vikings can't play well against the Packers in any situation, it seems. But we're going to see how these games go. But that's all I got for now. Have a great night, folks, and we'll catch up sometime next week.